Shinji and Warhammer40k. Chapter 22. Inquiry into Values. Part 3.
Second impact. Despite not being impact per se, but a savage explosion of purest power, was such that knocked the earth off its normal tilt. Japan lost its winters and the lower half of eastern Russia began to warm up. Manchurian oil and fresh growing plains were a valuable prize for Novi Soviet, one that they were unwilling to give up to anyone. No pleas, no barter, no immigration. Their nations were among those least affected by impact. Although the Volga industrial basin was nearly a write-off, moving capitals and shifting industry to the warming east was the sort of mass action that they excelled in. There was one caveat though. Siberia's gulag conditions shrunk dramatically. For the sake of secrecy, many camps moved even farther north towards the Arctic Circle. One of these camps was known merely as PKRU, the finest and most secretive of Russian psychomotive research facilities.
Hardy cod. No, comrade, it is not to keep the psychics from running away. Despite the rumor-mongerings of Americans, we treat our psychics extremely well. The code is to protect them from painful human contact.
The APC rumbled on through the pitiless and featureless expanse of whiteness.
The Maskirovka is to protect them from even more painful non-human contact. Like, for example, capitalist missiles.
I suppose that's why Russia has more psychics than any other nation, even China. Kaworu kept his little smile. I've heard of special considerations you give to their families. It seems the quickest way to enter into a comfortable life. Well, there are too many distractions, too many psychological misdiagnoses in the rest. Too many other ways to make money off their talents. The elderly Red Army colonel made a sniffing sound. He was trying very hard to be polite, being that he was on a special direct from the Politburo. The strange-looking Asiatic boy with him was an important person, because of that. Doesn't the idea that some people are simply special run counter to the general ideas of communism? And strangely enough, it was that which was their saving grace. Order after impact was quickly recovered and maintained, even by iron means if that was required. Smaller nations around it sorely needed the stability and resources that was locked within what would eventually be called Novi Soviet. It was hard to respect the commercialistic viewpoint when the world market was, well, dead.
Yes, well, the common people each have their own talents. Psychics are not to be treated more than, say, athletes who give their personal best for the greater good of the nation.
Science forced adjustments in ideology, as the manifesto as espoused by Marx and Lenin couldn't have predicted the economic efforts of robotic assembly line manufacturing, thereby cutting out the ignorant working class entirely, and the advent of second impact and the increase in birth mutations that it caused. Kaworu chuckled. He could feel the BMP transport slowing down.
We have arrived,
the driver called back to the guests. The freezing wind stung at his face as he disembarked, but to him it was an interesting sensation. His magnificently massive brethren could only feel joy or pain, and very little variance in between. The same nerves that fire pleasure were the same for pain, and he found it another of humanity's wonderful oddities that the boundary between them could be so blurred. There was nothing in the scenery that indicated anything other than snow-covered desolation. However, the driver and the colonel seemed to be so sure. The officer waved at nothing and made an X with his arms over his head. After a minute or so, a grinding sound issued forth and an elevator emerged from the ground. It was only large enough to accommodate a few people, and the vehicle had to remain on top. And as soon as they went in, the personal carrier moved on, making tracks leading away from the site. Snow-blowing machines erased comparatively shallow footprints. It was likely such secrecy wasn't necessary, but better safe than sorry. They had already, after all, developed such paranoid measures into an art form. After a long descent, the elevator doors opened with a hiss, cold air steaming out from the temperature differential. Kaworu blinked. It wasn't nearly as big as the Geofront, but an impressive effort nonetheless. The colonel frowned a bit at the warm air hitting his face. He began to take off his coat.
We will not lead this here,
he said aside. There was a coat rack nearby, upon which were already hung several deep winter greatcoats. As Kaworu copied, taking off his coat lined with real white wool fur, a tall and reedy man approached. The colonel introduced him as Dr. Bundayev, no relation to that other Bundayev. The scientist looked harmless enough, though he did have a thin beard and thick, round-rimmed eyeglasses. The corridor walls and roofs inside the PKRU complex were painted a cheery robin's egg blue. The floors were polished white tile. The colonel winked his nose at all the weird bourgeoisie affections, but realised that healthy, happy children were less likely to send their trainers' heads exploding. In the end, brainwashing and keeping control was proven to be just that ridiculously simple. Family values and party loyalty were just other forms of mental shapings. They were given a tour around the complex, with the laboratories, schools, and even collective sleeping quarters. PKRU North Psychomotive Research Facility was a box about half a kilometre deep and 2 kilometres in length, sunk into the ground. It was deep enough to withstand those detestable, yet nifty, American bunker-busting missiles, but not a direct nuclear strike. Hence the secrecy. The little mines within could be accurately considered to be more dangerous than mere nuclear warheads.
As you can see, the children are not being mistreated and are honestly eager to do their duty,
the doctor said to them, justifiably proud. His work prevented him from earning a Nobel, but he knew he deserved it several times over.
Their abilities are being developed towards useful purposes. We are not in the habit of making human weapons here.
Interesting choice of words, Doctor. The army's in the habit of turning humans into weapons. For the good of the nation and the greater masses, of course. Kaworu then grinned a bit. How many here even remember what it is to see the real sky? All the children were handed over by their parents to be raised by the party, willingly or unwillingly. I'm sure they believe all that you say about the outside world being full of danger and corruption. Dr. Bundiev gave a wary look at the army colonel standing emotionless behind the teen, and replied,
They will be inserted into normal society at a later date, when they have acquired true discernment.
When it was absolutely certain that their loyalty to the party was unshakable. He coughed into his fist and looked into the one-way glass of the observation room.
By the way, if you will forgive my asking, friend, have you ever been tested for psychic potential?
Why do you ask that?
Well, I recognize this is prejudicial of me, but you do share certain traits we find most common in our subjects.
Albinism was a rare trait, but most of their psychics had thin builds and hair usually turning into a washed-out shade. What's the highest rating you have? Kaworu replied impishly. He gestured slightly with one hand. You may consider me a stage above that. The scientist floated up into the air, his arms flailing to maintain balance. His shock quickly faded into excitement.
Astounding,
he said, while still uncontrollably floating.
This level of telekinesis done with such ease.
His most gifted students can only just barely manage to keep a book-sized object aloft for a few seconds. Kaworu snorted. Pitiful little Lilum, to be impressed by such tricks. To paraphrase a term, physics is my bitch. The colonel behind him drifted his hand towards the holster, intense for actions. Though to him things suddenly made a lot more sense. Of course they'd send a psychic to investigate a psychic facility. He was chosen for his extremely high level of resistance to meddling, despite not being a psychic himself. One of the things taught to him was that psychics were a resource, and despite their unnatural powers, were not as useful or in any way actually powerful unless acting as part of a group. The abilities were simply one part of a chain of critical events. Kaworu set the scientist down. Dr. Bundiev adjusted his lab coat and coughed again.
Well, I can guess why you are here. Follow me, please.
They followed him deeper into the complex, through branching corridors and down several levels, until they came into a thick wooden door marked only by a little white ceramic duck nailed into the panelling. Dr. Bundiev opened it up to reveal a room that was simply girly. The wallpaper was black flowers upon a pale violet background, and the furniture were painted in rose pink. Sitting within was a young girl, barely 10 years of age, dressed in a dark purple dress with white frills on the skirt, collars and neck. She had a doll, made of simple cloth, rope and cotton.
Hello, my little falcon. How are you feeling today?
Greeted Dr. Bundiev. What are you, some form of lolicon? Was the same thought through the colonel and Kaworu's mind. She turned around. Her hair was straight and jet black, cut around neck length. Her eyes were dead of expression, but it struck everyone how they seemed to shine as brilliant amber.
I am not uncomfortable,
she replied flatly. The doctor made a slight bow.
May I introduce you to Anita, the pride and joy of the psychokinekiskoye ledovatelskoye objedinje Vasalka. As far as we know, one of 3 Class 8 psychics in the world, and the only one truly precognitive.
You need not wonder, Doctor, Kaworu said, his grin rather friendly. She's the finest precognitive in the world. There are those with more power and greater range of vision, but only she can be so accurate to the momentary details.
Dr. Bundayev preened as if he was being praised. Anita looked at her visitors, first to the Colonel, to whom she made a nod in deferential greeting. At Kaworu, her amber eyes seemed to dim.
I know you,
she said to him.
I remember nothing of before I came here, but I know you,
she whispered.
In the past and in the future you stand, and I can see you. Ask your questions now.
We each have our little parts to play in this game called life, Kaworu replied, his tone soft and even soothing. Tell me, what do you think of Shinji Ikari?
The little girl closed her eyes for a moment. She opened them again.
I want to bear his children,
she replied tonelessly. The doctor sighed. That is your usual reply to questions about that boy's character or motivations. You have no idea how disturbing it is, but I do not believe that she even perceives the same area of time we do.
You seem to hold some contempt for him, Kaworu said aside.
The troubles of the outside world are perpetual. Warriors, leaders, masters of men and machine, these all pass. We have been getting so many directives about him recently. Can he actually be that important? And we are being criticized for our lack of results.
He is immune to precognition. He has always been,
Anita put in, every word as if carrying the weight of ages.
His very presence ropes everything around him. You may follow. You might resist. You can remain behind.
She looked up, as if staring into the sky that mere layers of armor sheaths could never hide from her sight.
You are whole 30,000 years too young to attempt to ride ahead of his crusade.
And Kaworu laughed. Can you tell me anything I don't already know? I suppose I'm not immune to your sight, he smirked. So tell me, will I win? She paused. Anita was born knowing how to speak, aware of every shameful secret her mother ever did, and certain of only one thing, the moment of her death. There were others before her, but all other infants all through time were stillborn, their fresh unshaped minds simply liquefying from the strain. For some reason she survived. The collective were unanimous in their judgment, the moment they stared into her bright animal-like eyes that seemed to see everything. She had to die. She was too unnatural, too dangerous by far. It was 2009, and while the restrictions the Orthodox faith, or any other faith for that matter, had long since relaxed, they were not quite religious. However, her very existence seemed like a blasphemy. They gave her up to the mutation squad so quickly. In the PKRU, her freakish foreknowledge was something to be juiced out.
Is that really all there is?
She asked no one in particular.
It seems too simple.
She clutched tightly at her doll.
It is too cruel.
Kaworu rated.
You have a goal,
she said after a while.
I cannot see what will happen when you finally clash with him, but I know you will live long enough to see that goal completed.
He simply nodded. Knowing too much of the future may trap one into a self-fulfilling prophecy. He preferred that cat would live or die in his hands, instead of by peering into the box.
And now,
she spoke again, slowly and oddly hopeful.
You will kill me.
What?
The Colonel reached for his gun, but before he could get so much as a shot off, Kaworu gestured nonchalantly behind him and sent the man crashing into the wall. The plaster cracked under the impact, the walls being reinforced concrete, held. His bones broke. He coughed up blood and slowly slid down, leaving a red stain behind. It's such a pity, but I have to, you know? Kaworu said to the girl, then turning to the terrified psychomotive research chief. 1,000 minds together is the critical mass that may revive him. The man ran for the door, but it was sealed shut by some strange pressure. Kaworu could use his AT field all he wanted, since the pattern blue sensors were hardly worldwide. These were mostly aimed towards space, and even back at Tokyo 3, a low level of AT field manipulation could still escape notice. In the errands he performed for SEAL, it was that easy. The little girl stood up to her fullest height, not much, and hugged the raggedy doll even tighter. The doll had red button eyes and blue rope for hair. It had a simple one-piece orange dress, with a strange toothy skull design stitched to the front. Anita stared so seriously up at him.
Strike me down, and he will become more powerful than you can ever imagine,
she said, her voice echoing weirdly. Kaworu grinned. I don't need to imagine. I want to see it. He reached forward and plunged his fingers into her skull. There was no blood, as if her flesh and bone was fluid, and his digits just melting into it. She frowned slightly and blinked. A soft ugh escaped her lips. She felt something being stolen. So, that's how it's done. Little girl, so will I, he replied, hissing softly. Her eyelids drooped. And besides, you are all just mistakes of evolution anyway. It's too early for you. Go back to sleep. He took his hand away. There was no wound. He looked at his fingertips. Anita sighed. She fell back, making a soft sound as she hit the floor. Her doll rolled away from her open grasp. Dr. Bundiev was pulling and bashing at the thick wooden door with his fists. The alarms weren't sounding. His master code was being ignored. His screams for help were unheard. Kaworu looked up and flared the light of his soul. Behold, Lilim, my mercy. You do not need to live this lie any longer. He lifted his arms and laughed. Behold, the fist of an angry god! Something punched through layers of rock, concrete and steel. As soon as the black sphere made contact with his AT field, it detonated. In cleansing fire, the mutations exalted by man were cleansed from the world. He stood alone, floating in the middle of an immense blast crater. He was clad in light clothes, but the cold no longer reached him. He grinned in satisfaction and flew to the west. 12 minutes later, the northern monitoring station was destroyed. 4 minutes after that, Moscow too, or what used to be the outskirts of Leningrad, then experienced as like steel rain. Kaworu landed and pulled warm clothing out of someone who no longer had any need of it. The people were panicking, despite that the damage, while widespread, was just so randomly inflicted. Whole buildings stood intact in the middle of blocks of rubble. The screams, the despair, so satisfying. Can you hear me now? He thought, while staring up into the sky towards the east. Can you see me now? This is punishment. This is my justice. You will pay the price of your baseless arrogance, pretentious humanity, pretending to be something you are not. Our dream is millions of years old, and our purpose shall remain long after that. Just to add to the confusion, he went around snapping the necks of military officers that could have helped curb panic. The Russian people's pragmatic mindset and abiding over suffering irked him somehow. Most likely, despite proclaiming themselves as working for the greater good, it reminded him only so much of an imperium. Even the emblem was similar. The Ava carrier rushed back home at breakneck speeds. Sure enough, at the end of the second hour, Kyoto 2 suffered another bombardment. 3 black pods broke into hundreds of smaller kinetically charged spheres that punched right through even the tallest buildings, then exploding, sending jagged bits of ceramic-like metal flying all over as shrapnel. There was no AT field for it to bounce off on. 2 hours was enough time to get most of the people out of the city. Apparently, though, Shinji Ikari's footsteps were cursed. Rikizuna watched the city burn from a vantage point at the temporary evacuating camp in the surrounding hills. His visit, the enemy's choice of targets, she just knew it had to be his fault somehow. Unfortunately, she was right about that. Confusion reigned over Tokyo 3. The people had retreated into the shelters at the outskirts of town, with tank battalions positioned all over to protect them. The sky was burning red when the Ava carrier arrived. Hexagonal shapes flared as the pods struck with such force that they simply liquefied on contact with the absolutely immovable. Asuka snorted. The shield she and Ray were putting up could withstand even greater punishment than that. She leaned back as she relaxed her field. There are actually more aircraft arriving. Tokyo 2, the official seat of government, was helpless before the attack. With the Evangelions providing protection from orbital bombardment, the city of Tokyo 3 was in all the world the only place truly safe. The government was hastily relocating. While Shinji Ikari was suiting up, Fuyutsuki made his way into the command center. He found there something he never expected to see. Someone openly ordering Gendo Ikari around in the middle of his own command center. He smirked. Of course, the fact that the other person was the Prime Minister of Japan probably explained his boldness. "Sir!" He bowed to the older man, who couldn't be called charitably anything other than plump. "It is good to see you are safe, Prime Minister Sakata."
Ah, Kozo-sensei. So the boy's here, eh?
He turned to look back up at the command post.
So what do you plan to do about this situation, Ikari? The sensible thing would be to do nothing until we obtain more information about the enemy.
He replied through his steepled hands.
People are dying out there, Ikari. You can't just sit by and do nothing. With all due respect, Prime Minister, I have nearly every nation in the world screaming at me to do something, and I can only give you the same answer I can give them. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that NERV can do other than to protect Tokyo 3. Moving the Evangelions anywhere else would take nonsensical time and effort.
His glasses glinted.
Here we must consider measures to destroy the enemy quickly, and we cannot do that without more information.
NERV's command center was used during Sahaquiel's initial attack as the military NERV center for JSSDF forces. Once more it was being used to coordinate attacks, not just from around the nation but all over the world. Fibre optic lines and satellite observation gave them the only clear picture of the situation anyone could have hoped to achieve. While this was going on, General Asagiri made his way into the shared command desk that the JSSDF generals used back during that first assault on Tokyo 3.
Regardless, we still have several options available,
General Manara said up to the central block. The auxiliary controls given over to them were at the left wing of the NERV Central multi-complex. He looked at his watch.
Since Tokyo 3 is at least in danger right now, let us leave us to those who want to defend their own nations.
Everyone important to the issue were there, even Kaji as UN attaché. With his direct superiors out of contact, he was technically the highest ranking person there, though his authority was limited only to when control of the situation would be surrendered to NERV. He'd done that long ago, recognising that there was no army in the world that was prepared to accept orbital bombardment.
"Where's the Angel now?"
he asked. The holographic main screen showed both a map and its projected path and speed, but a real-time satellite video of Sahaquiel. The Angel had the appearance of a giant eye, with appendages spread out on either side like great six-fingers hands. Dark globules near the tips where bombardment pods were being created. Ritsuko responded after checking the outgoing comm line into the Evangelions was still closed.
The Angel is currently inside Kazakh airspace. There's wide area EM flux around it, making radar-based calculations unreliable.
She looked to Masato standing beside her.
The path is still a direct line to NERV Germany. Projected arrival time using current speed, 2 hours 14 minutes. Damn! Poor Asuka!
Whispered Masato.
Is it possible to evacuate everyone within a 50-kilometre radius in that time? NERV Germany's fibre optic links is our only reliable eye into Europe,
the scientist replied, her voice flat.
The civilians are being driven away, but if you were in that situation, what would you do? I'd remain behind until it's almost too late. A skeleton crew won't leave. They're hoping NERV Japan can do something inside that time frame. They don't even have the benefit of a functional Evangelion to provide a shield, unlike us or NERV America.
Isn't there anything we can do?
The Prime Minister asked. That level of dedication was something he hadn't really expected from NERV's branches.
Wait, there's another Evangelion? This is not the time for that,
Gendo put in.
Dr. Akagi, do you have any solutions yet?
She scowled and made a sound.
No, it's far enough that the curvature of the Earth obscures any firing angle from here. The only one who could save them is themselves.
A shrill siren sounded throughout the command centre. The main screen flashed. NERV Germany's relaying that it's going under the second phase of bombardment, said Makoto.
How many projectiles?
3, Akagi-sensei. The screen showed a satellite image, 3 burning trails in the upper atmosphere, marked out by 3 red triangles on the map.
They won't be caught off guard this time,
Masato said aloud.
Now let's see if the air defense missiles can do something about those things.
The Angel might be jamming radar targeting within its own sphere of influence, but once out of that, the bombard spheres weren't travelling too fast to track. Messerwerth for active defence went online and sent out interceptor missiles. The main screen expanded the view of the sky. Flaming arrowheads met in midair. The screen had to jerk quickly to follow the targets, leaving behind the drifting smoke from the explosions.
Damn!
Masato struck her fist into her open palm.
It should have knocked the things even a little off course. There might be too much mass, but I doubt it should have gone through completely unscathed. I'm afraid we can only come to one conclusion. Those individual spheres are protected by their own AT field. What? But how can that be? I have a hypothesis, but not enough data to really support it. Let's leave it for later.
Ritsuko turned and looked up at Gendo.
NERV Germany has no choice but to deploy a positron cannon, using similar tactics we used.
2 hours, pushing their power plants to the unsafe outputs, gathering that into one beam. Would it be enough? Impact, said Shigeru. The screen shook and went crackling for several moments. After a while he continued with, NERV Berlin 2 reports on the incidental damage. The strikes were less accurate this time.
The last Angel did this too, messing with the electromagnetic spectrum. It's using our own high-energy emissions to guide its attacks. Analysing the maps of the areas hit, we found the attacks are centred around broadcasting and radar stations. That these were often located in densely populated and strategically important areas is convenient?
NERV Germany's initial damage assessment was being transmitted. Maya gasped.
Senpai! We miscalculated!
What? Ritsuko turned back to the screen. A smaller window opened up to show a satellite view of Berlin 2, revealed its pockmarked glory. However, most of NERV Germany's assets were deep enough underground to escape harm. The view scrolled down south, towards another pitted area near a forest.
Isn't that the temporary site for organising refugees? 30 kilometres away,
Maya said, her face twisted into a grimace.
It's not just enemy emissions. There was nothing there that could have shown up as a marker. Nothing but people. And they're still far enough over the horizon they shouldn't even see the site.
The scientist slammed her palms down on the burnished steel of the command center's tower edge. It was near the same spot her mother jumped off from.
Impossible. How can it guide those projectiles? Is there something about a critical mass of people?
Dr. Akagi, if we treat the enemy's attack as some form of artillery, then there's another method used when the target is well beyond sight range,
General Akira said, with his head bowed as well.
A forward observer may paint the target with something that the attack may use to home in on.
That could be anything,
she shot back.
We detected no signals from the site, and who would be helping the Angel?
She took several long breaths.
Something from the initial bombardment. Something the refugees may be carrying?
Specific radiation? Biological traces?
It could be anything.
The Prime Minister looked ready to panic.
We should move everyone to Tokyo free.
Ridiculous, Gendo muttered. Then in a louder voice, it might be protected from all attacks for the moment, but do not doubt that the enemy's main objective is here.
Why is that?
The politician shouted back. Gendo didn't answer. Casualty reports are... Makoto paused in his report and grit his teeth. NERV Germany says, we agreed with your theory. There was no other probable cause at the time. We do not blame you for this. And, if we fail, find a way to kill the Angel quickly.
They really aren't leaving now,
Masato said.
What are they planning to do?
Gendo frowned slightly. The enemy seems to trace our communications. How will this affect our satellite links?
It seems to ignore directed microwave and landline signals. For now. But if this goes on, NERV will be utterly blind. We've no way of restoring sensors that are lost. And we need to see the enemy if we hope to counterattack.
A few tense minutes passed. We've received confirmation from Germany, Baltic, the French and Russian strategic forces, Shigeru reported to everyone. Maya had to keep her eye on the others. He and Makoto were reduced to glorified telephone operators, relaying incoming and outgoing communications. Combined anti-orbital initiative to commence in 30 seconds. The screen shifted to a more distant view of the Angel. It seemed to be hanging still in space, but that was just an illusion brought out by the relative speed and size of the Earth. The coordinated strategic forces had to launch at different times for their attacks to arrive near simultaneously. What Shigeru referred to was the moment of truth. Chinese forces launched every orbit-capable warhead they had, Kaji commented for the benefit of those who just arrived. Here we have almost 4 times the number, the largest single release of nuclear and non-nuclear arms the world might ever see. The rockets were arriving, from the east, from the west, from the north, and from the south. Boom! Static. The view shifted to even more distant satellite cameras, free from the EMP effects. Boom, boom, boom! Though of course there was no sound in space, their mind supplied what such a scene demanded. Sahaquiel had sensed their approach long before that. Things faster than any living thing should be, instruments of senseless murder. What kind of predator destroys that which it could consume instead, adding to its own strength? The little spawns of Lilith made absolutely no sense. That which wears their shape was right. The universe itself they expunged such nonsense. It knew escape was impossible. It closed its eyes and waited to accept their reprisal. The initial strike of 24 N2-tipped rockets didn't faze Sahaquiel. The next barrage arrived barely 5 seconds after the blast effects began to fade. Then the next, 40 missiles all at once, timed so the detonations of the previous strike would not destroy them. Then another, and another, and it was as if day itself arrived over Eastern Europe. It was as if a sun was growing before their eyes. Over 15 years since impact, the many nuclear-capable weapons of the world phased out dirty bombs in favour of the cleaner and more stable N2 devices. Hydrogen bombs, unnecessarily powerful, were sent up from secret reserves. Sahaquiel received enough bombing to equal projected yields from the entirety of Cold War fears. "Nothing could have survived that," whispered General Akira. "Nothing." This is what mankind can do when truly united. We shine with the light of 1,000 suns. The flash faded. They had to make do with ground-based telescopes to scan the area. Every satellite in most of that part of the hemisphere might as well be junked. A loud, anguished groan rose throughout the NERV command centre, echoing maybe all over the world. The Angel was completely unharmed. The bombardment pods were gone though. It had to restart the growth. "Impossible!" Misada spat out. "There's no way!"
"All the other Angels we ever encountered, they're AT fields. We could still breach them with sufficient N2 mines."
General Minara leaned forward, putting his palms together as if praying, and put his forehead to lean on them.
"How can something be so strong?"
The Prime Minister looked stricken with terror.
Can we even beat it? Ikari!
"We require more information before we can proceed further. We can count ourselves fortunate at least that its offence still lags well behind its defence."
"No, I mean, your son."
Gendo frowned. Slightly. "Evangelion 1 launching!" The purple Evangelion went up the magnetic rails. There are actually several Ava rail pads, 8 to be precise, but the one they used most often was at the southeast rim, K5, near the Geofront hills. Up from the launch pads, slanting towards the sidewalls of the Geofront, then up again, slanting again towards the Geofront roof/city foundations, past layers of armour plates, and up again to emerge near the edge of the main street. It reminded Shinji of the needlessly complex boost delivery systems he saw in the old Super Robot shows. Perhaps it was necessary in NERV's case, though. A direct pillar up from the Geofront and towards the roof would be hideously vulnerable. The enemy could just drop down the exit gates directly into NERV. Not to mention it would be a massive eyesore. On the other hand, pillars would directly support the Geofront roof. It wasn't as if Tokyo 3, despite being future capital, was such a large city anyway. It was barely 5 kilometres across, with the Geofront floor below merely 6 kilometres in diameter. The actual Geofront, Lilith's egg, though, it boggled his mind to know how massive it was. According to soundings, it was nearly 13 3/4 kilometres in diameter. The greatest of human achievements was dug into a pitiful percentage of that space-going hulk. Shinji stepped out into the surface and saw the other Evangelions in relaxed stances, their duty done. They didn't need to keep the AT field raised all the time, after all. If it was the enemy's intention to strain the defenders before properly attacking, then they were going to unwind and conserve their strength for as long as they were able. Unit 2 sat on a hillside, leaned back. All that was missing was an Ava-scale cigar to complete the indolent ease of the picture.
Hey, Shinji!
Asuka greeted, her face flashing into a window in his plug.
About time you got back! Damn cheating angel! Does it want to kill me with boredom?
Unit 0 stood nearby. The plug-hit window, however, showed Rei relaxing as far as she allowed herself, with her hands crossed over her chest and her eyes closed. I do not believe it is in any way boring to those experiencing death from above.
Tch! It's unfair! Involving people uselessly!
That ugly feeling again of being helpless.
Damn that thing!
What happened? Masato-san hurried me into the plug before I could ask anything. Everything said or done inside the Ava plugs were automatically delivered to the NERV command center. There was no such thing as privacy for an Ava pilot, as provided by Asuka's tirade after Israfel's defeat was relayed to everyone's hearing, even on a direct Ava-to-Ava link using outside-mounted telephones. However, it wasn't broadcast over main channel unless necessary. That situation was a result of combat open comms. People underground had better things to do than listening to teenage banter.
Why don't you tell me?
Asuka replied.
We've been out here ever since the angel showed up on the sensors. I don't know how much damage it's been doing. They're turning us into mushroom people again.
So you? Shinji groaned. Kept in the dark, Rei. He made the Ava look up towards the west. I suppose it's to keep us from worrying about things we have no control over.
Shinji, isn't there anything at all we can do?
Unit 1 sat beside Unit 2 and adopted a thinking pose. It can strike at us with impunity, and its shield is the curvature of the Earth itself. Even if the Evangelions could fly, it'd take us too long to get there, all the while it can do even more damage. Is this evidence of cunning? Asked Rei. I don't know. These angels, I know they can rebuild themselves so quickly to suit a situation. This is unprecedented foresight. The Evangelion made a quick war. This is why we need a space fleet. We should have tried to launch orbital defenses months ago. He should have pushed through with those plans, but getting his hands on a loose submarine proved more difficult than it first appeared. If it was watertight, then it would likely be airtight as well, with some modifications. He still had to gather the needed support and personnel for the endeavour.
Space fleet! It's been more than 50 years since man first stepped on the moon and we still have to return to it. We even gave up on the space station. It's hard enough just getting up there. How would you expect anyone to fight?
Shinji laughed. Asuka, remember that we can push with the AT field. Between the three of us, we can lift battleships into orbit. That might work too. If it could be made airtight, starting out with the benefit of heavy armour and missile/anti-missile defences, more like an orbital fortress than a warship, since vacuum manoeuvring with their current level of technology would be laughable anyway. For propulsion, how about an Orion drive? The massive energy cannon at the bow will have as it the most pressing concern not a supply of power, which could be easily given by multiple fusion reactors, but the build-up of heat. If for some reason the Evangelion would combine with the space battleship, that'd be less of a problem. The AT field implications alone would make space mecha far more useful than missiles or fighter craft. The Evangelion's so absurdly powerful that blatant physics violations may be its only use other than in worthless wars. We don't really have an overpopulation problem that necessitates building space colonies. But right here, right now, we can punch our way into the heavens. We still don't know where the angels come from. If it's from the moon, then by all means we should invade the moon. Such deep, drawn-out silence.
Shinji, get the hell out of that Evangelion!
Masato's voice broke into the entry plug. Eh? But why? He complained in a small voice. I just got here.
We're planning on ways to counterattack the angel. Get that sexy brain of yours down here.
Oh, crap. Was I thinking out loud again? Both other pilots nodded. Apparently at some point the grown-ups decided it was time to give the poor ignorant pilots some encouragement to keep them from getting too bored. Shinji sighed. His Evangelion walked back to the elevator, its posture slumped in depression. Is that even possible? Asuka asked Ray as Unit 1 started to descend. There was one reason to abandon personal powers in favour of synchronization efficiency with the Evangelion. She realised that in trying to be the best pilot, number 1 of the Eva, such ideas would never have occurred to her. Once the angels were dead, would she become just another tool of war? She frowned. She was a person, a talented beauty. She should be more than just that. Pilot Soyu, in him, all things are possible. For Ray, the future might as well not exist. The only thing important to her was every day in his service. Similar business was afoot at the Trident base. Mana Kirishima arrived to see Magnos Tancred already at pre-launch status. She went directly to the base commander's office for orders. Since the JSSDF was once more using NERV's facilities for command, she found there instead second-in-command Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Saburo, a square-faced man new to Tokyo 3. Also in that office were Chief Takita, seated relaxing on his own desk nearby, and near the water dispenser stood a man with a particularly careless look about him. He could be called somewhat handsome if his expression didn't droop with such drowsy disinterest. Yang-sensei! Mana bowed to him briefly. I'm sorry for your loss. He smiled back gently. I may be Chinese by blood, but I come from Hong Kong, not the mainland. I don't have any surviving family or friends in the area. He rubbed at his untidy locks. Still, NERV being a civilian endeavour, it was only natural that it put itself in economically advantageous regions. The capital is gone, NERV China, the core of the army, most of the fleet. He sighed. He reminded himself to keep some emotional distance. It's bad, but I think they can recover even from this. But we might as well consider the PRC non-existent for the purposes of asking them for any more help. Excuse me. The Lieutenant Colonel leaned back on his chair. They might need Miracle Yang back. Please, I'm just a historian, replied the newest teacher to Tokyo 3. I work for the UN now. If the division commanders of surrounding areas can recover order, the other cities can accept the trouble of recreating the government. He sat down and sloshed cold water in his plastic cup. At least, with it happening so suddenly, there won't be as much problem with feeding and housing millions of refugees like in the other nations. He was just so tired of it all. There was nothing he could really do to help. Crises were often said to be the crucible from which heroes were born. Masato Katsuragi, for example, was given made Operations Director of NERV, a role that put the safety of the entire world upon her judgments. She reached that post not because of her father's original influence on Project Ava, but rather in spite of it. Her personality flaws were tolerated because of her proven tactical genius. There were many others who stepped up and dared, pushing back the chaotic designs and stitching civilization back together. The 15 years between Second Impact and the Return of the Angels saw some of the most intense conflicts, mental, physical, and emotional, in all of Earth's history. There were tens of thousands of heroes out of that time. Most were dead. Mana Kirishima was raised to be a soldier, an officer. Even her current rank, as UN Commissar, gave her authority equal to that of an army captain. Masato was already promoted to a major at the time, though her actual authority appoints outweighed generals or even ministers, colloquially by several thousand tons. Most commanders, as proved by the initial foray of JSSDF defenders, were at a loss on how to handle the unknowable tactics of the Angels. Mana was therefore their hope in this, as the field could change so rapidly beyond the bounds of planning. They were getting used to how Snafu likes to settle down around Tokyo 3. This didn't make studied tactics useless, however. She was initially intended to be among the next generation of generals. She studied the tactics of other nations, and the generals behind them, knowing she might have to face them someday. One of these was the Chinese admiral named Yang Wen-li, nicknamed Miracle Yang, who was almost single-handedly responsible for the survival of the PRC from the many fractured elements attacking it both from within and without. His naval support was crucial to maintaining legitimate army presence in the temporary headquarters, and he was eerily adept at peering into the strategies of the enemy elements. The doctrine that suppressed initiative from the lower officers both worked against the enemy and for him. Despite that he was technically from another branch of the military, the fact that his advice allowed junior officers to simply beat overwhelming odds made those close by more willing to obey. In the end, he was de facto supreme commander of the loyalist forces, and with not a single loss to any major engagement. It seemed as if he merely chose the least offensive of factions and helped them climb back into power. His victories, however, had made politically unreliable, for if he desired, he might be the next breakaway warlord. The incredible mess that was the Second Manchurian conflict brought him out of convalescence/house arrest, and it was he that convinced the political leaders to swallow their goddamn pride and ask for help from the nation that to the southeast with conveniently intact naval and air base nearby. As it was, China would lose its own northern oil fields. Japan had no other ready source of crucial oil, as the Middle East was imploding and the US limiting its own exports. By the end of the 3 months, they all shared Manchuria and Sakhalin. The three nations even had a satisfying economic agreement, forming a triad in the east that relied upon their still intact industries steeply polarised to provide an echo of the collapsed global economy. That man, now 38 yet still unmarried, lounged about in front of her. He'd retired, just a teacher now. Originally he joined up with the military to finance his graduate schooling, planning on teaching history as his life's work. It was strange how Second Impact forced people into roles that they might not have been suited for, but in the end just excelled in. Shinji Ikari was a withdrawn boy that eventually would have been content as a librarian or some other paper-pushing job. Mana Kirishima didn't even dream about someday piloting a giant robot. Kensuke was a geek, with all the physical aptitude of a wet noodle, and someone that sensibility dictated to keep absolutely away from military equipment. Admiral Yang wanted even at the height of battle to just retreat to a corner with an old book. Wars were just so messy and noisy and troublesome. Who really needed that? In the end, the military is just a tool for killing, he was fond of saying, so it's best to be as inoffensive a tool as possible. Offence in this context refers to destruction. Peace and politics, for all their flaws, were worth protecting in that at least they can create. Minds such as him, he complained, could only destroy. We don't have the order to mobilize, Kirishima, said Lieutenant Colonel Saburo. Yang-sensei, as the UN observer for this base, do you have any insights to the situation? Yang yawned. He reached into his pocket and took out a packet of instant coffee. He broke it open with his tea and emptied it into the cup. Then he poured hot water from the dispenser. That way the plastic wouldn't melt and the powder could still dissolve. He stirred it with a pencil. He took a careful sip. He looked up and smiled weakly. We never really took the idea of orbital bombardment seriously. As long as the nations obeyed the no weapons in space policy, that seemed to be enough. Rebuilding after impact took greater priority than space exploration or defense. He took another sip. In the end, I think we will need to rely on Shinji Ikari again. If he needs our help, we should be happy to comply. He chuckled. That was why he was there, after all. He had to bow to a stupendous bribe, to see history as it was happening. He might have been called one of those that shape history, but he knew well enough that the boy was one of those that could truly make it. There was nothing in his studies that could be used as parallel. He had no predictions to make on his strategy. The UN offered him observer status only after he'd already finalised plans to move to Tokyo 3. People called him the sort of genius that comes along once in every 1,000 years. A modern Khan, Napoleon, or even Alexander if the conditions had been a little different. He never wanted that distinction. Sometimes he felt as if he was born in the wrong time, but the world needed him right then. It could all have gone for the worse if he wasn't there to suffer for its sake. He also had a feeling it was much like that for the younger Ikari. He could read between the lines. The boy wanted him there, so he decided to go. It wasn't as if he had anything better to do than sit inside an empty old house. He'd yet to actually speak to the boy personally, but the mere thought of Yang Wen Li teaching Shinji Ikari was enough to frighten the heck out of a whole lot of people. NERV's main conference room contained Gendo Ikari, Masato Katsuragi, Shinji Ikari, seated near the far end away from the screen. Generals Minara, Akira and Asagiri were on the left side. Kaji Ryuji, Prime Minister Sakata and Defence Minister Inabe, who had just recently arrived, sat at the left. The latter was squinting suspiciously at the boy's presence on the table. What could he contribute? All the angels needed was to be told what to do. The actual planning would be left to the adults that knew the real implications of what was happening. Ritsuko Akagi stood near the screen, with Maya beside her with the projector controls.
The Angel may have withstood recent attacks, but it seems to have slowed down its movement and attack rate. Estimates now point to about 5 hours before it reaches NERV Germany. The timed attacks on Tokyo 3 continues, with one every 15 minutes due to its alternating regrowth of bombardment pods. We don't know when the next attack on other regions will be, but there's nothing we can do about that right now.
There's nothing we can do about something on the other side of the world, said the Prime Minister. They should understand that. The most important thing's to kill the Angel, of course, Kaji put in. No, the most critical task at this point is to save NERV Germany, Gendo countered. The best way to do this is to destroy the Angel, but conserving NERV's resources as far as we are able should be a priority. If there's some way to drive the enemy off, then we should take it. And where would it go, Akari? Is it perfectly alright to let some other poor bastard get hit? In a word, yes. Unlike NERV China, NERV Germany is capable of constructing its own Evangelions, as proved by Unit 2. If Europe wants to have a chance of defending itself from further attacks, then this makes Berlin more important than, say, Paris. For a variety of reasons, he'd actually enjoy seeing Paris wiped off the face of the earth. People aren't safe even if they leave the cities, the Prime Minister groaned out.
The Angel tracking the locations of the refugees by traces left from the initial attack seems the most likely at this point, Ritsuko responded. It must signal at some level our senses are unable to detect.
Kaji-san, Shinji said suddenly. Has this information already been released? The UN attaché rubbed at his face.
Yes, that is our duty after all. There isn't really any point to closing their borders, since that many people can't move across the country that fast, but... There we go. Planes from affected nations being ordered to turn back by surrounding air forces. Those that already landed are being forced to take off. Where to? No one really cares.
That's insane,
Misato grumbled.
This hysteria is getting completely out of control. If someone out there gets panicky enough to start shooting...
Europe still has a lot of military power left, Kaji groaned. So, lovely Miss Ritsuko.
Well, we've 5 hours to think of a solution.
She adjusted her glasses and made a brief sniff.
Before we begin, let us review what we know of the Angel. Maya, push the button. Yes, Senpai!
The large screen showed a still image of the Angel.
The Angel is approximately 3 kilometers in width and 800 meters in length. This makes it the largest Angel we've encountered thus far, but size is easier without having to deal with gravity. Its main body holds an immense eye, presumably for seeing its targets better, but with its ability to hit things over the horizon anyway.
She frowned a bit.
Its main means of attack is flinging itself down with its AT field spread wide to inflict damage close to that of an asteroid of similar size hitting the Earth.
How bad is that?
Asked the Prime Minister. Then he winced. Beijing too. The Chinese were actually the first to create a duplicate capital, sending off the naming scheme all over the world as if in taunting calamity itself. There was no actual video of Sahaquiel's attack, but it was one of it slowly rising back into orbit.
Actually, we can expect the damage to be less over Berlin, since the Angel shed most of its initial velocity against Beijing. Now that we managed to slow it down, the impact crater will most likely be a magnitude less. It will still take out all of Berlin and much of the surrounding countryside.
She sighed.
Because of the distance between Europe and Nevada, assuming we don't destroy or slow down the Angel will have recovered greater velocity. Oddly appropriate, since NERV America is better fortified in that sense than NERV Germany.
Misato spoke up, frowning.
Heading west instead of east! Damn that thing! It's the only tactically sensible thing to do!
She leaned back and sneered at the screen.
Even if we destroy it, having taken out our support from the other branches will leave us weaker for the next enemy. We're going to be stuck with these 3 Evangelions to defend the whole wharf!
She slammed her fist down.
When did these things get so smart?
Elsewhere, Yang was saying,
if the enemy was just merely stupidly powerful enemies, then there shouldn't be any problem at all. The power of the Evangelion wouldn't be necessary. The fact that we can think makes us the ultimate predators on this planet.
I don't know if these things are smart, but if they can even think this far, someone behind them can. Maybe it's possible to get them to leave us alone.
Both Gendo and Kaji looked startled. Misato, being the only survivor of the Antarctic expedition, could be counted on to hate the Angels beyond all things.
This is happening and you're considering some way of maybe negotiating? Criticised the Defence Minister. People are dying out there. Do something useful, now! Have you forgotten NERV's purpose, Major Katsuragi? The Angels' purpose is the total annihilation of humanity. They have accomplished that during Second Impact, and now they've returned to finish the job. The question is, why? If they're intelligent entities, why do they want to destroy all of humanity? If they're merely beasts acting out in destructive instincts, then the question becomes even more pressing. No natural creature on this earth, and probably not even out there, comes with genocide coded into its being. Wiping out another species out of competition for resources is something that happens without deliberate intent.
Aren't there enemies that are natural enemies, Yang-sensei? Some insects seem to go into wars to destroy other types of insects in the area,
Man asked.
That is true. However, note that these creatures form parts of collective, relying on instincts deeply. In many ways, they're like machines. Replicate, consume, and make more. There's little variance. Every ant is pretty much the same as every other ant before it. The Angels, they seem far too specialized, too quick in adapting to be trapped like that. When you get to higher predatory levels, a wolf may hunt rabbits into extinction in its area, not because of any innate antipathy, but simply because it was hungry. Only humans, with perception and thinking, can indulge in genocide with deliberate intent.
When this situation brings us, it's a question of whether the Angels are intelligent and deliberately malevolent or not,
Masato said in a very ominous tone, looking at Ritsuko.
We believed so many things that NERV said. After all, they're supposed to be the expert on Angels. They still are. But a lot of the knowledge we have are simply conjectures. They want to destroy humanity. No need to ask why, they just do. They will attack Tokyo 3. Again, evidence seemed to support that, but we lacked the real reason why. We took it in, accepted it, and put other possibilities out of our mind. This actually disturbed me, but then I never really believed it myself until the Angels really did show up, 15 years later. Every angel we face is just that bit stronger than the last. Each one is different, each one wants to win. We know they're alive, so they don't want to die. If we hit them hard enough, fast enough, I wonder, would they decide it would be too much to keep attacking?
This is all just baseless conjecture, Major. The Angels are our enemy. This proves it more than all other encounters.
Exactly!
Masato grinned, matching his dismal glare with cheery glimmer.
We fight and more people get hurt as it goes on. We keep getting stronger, they keep getting stronger. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it, Shinji-kun?
She looked at him, winked, and he seemed amazed as well. It seemed casually was having a stabilizing effect on her after all. He probably spouted off about the ends not justifying the means, that their duty is to protect the earth and its people, not to kill and lift themselves up to the heavens using the bones of their defeated enemies as the ladder and the sinews of those sacrificed in the name of victory to tie it all together. The usual stuff.
Then what do you propose we do? Ask them nicely to stop?
The defense minister shouted.
Of course not. We kill them, of course. More than that, we must make them decide that attacking us in any way other than head-on would be a waste of time and their own lives. As long as we survive here, they've zero chance of victory.
Unit seeing Tokyo 3 as like flypaper makes extremely good sense. I don't know exactly what the Angels intend here, but as long as we control the combat area, we hold a powerful advantage. The Angel, by attacking areas outside of this, turns this fortress city into a prison. Outside, they have all the advantage. Therefore
what, Yang-sensei?
Man asked eagerly.
What's the proper thing to do? We attack the Angel from here,
Masato shouted.
We destroy from here, and have the Angels know there's no place on Earth that's beyond our reach.
Oh, sounds like you have a plan already, Masato.
Kaji grinned lopsidedly.
Can it be?
Ritsuko looked with wide-eyed amazement at her best friend.
You are your father's daughter, after all. Very well. If you're thinking what I'm thinking...
Masato seemed far too smug. It was likely.
Do you have a solution, Katsuragi?
Gendo asked.
Do enlighten us.
With what? The defense minister put in, prompting the prime minister to give him a look that said, Don't embarrass me further. His bluster was to force down his own fear that made his vision swim. NERV's complacence. No, all the world's blind acceptance of NERV's policies was bearing fruit.
Last I checked, we don't have intercontinental striking capability.
The N2 mines might bend it beyond recognition, but the no nukes policy still remained in Japan's lack of N2 tipped ICBMs, or any ICBMs for that matter, although their rocketry technology was excellent for that.
I don't know much about this AT field business. I'm a historian, not a physicist.
The lieutenant colonel snorted at that, but was willing to allow Yang the illusion that no one expected him to take up any other role.
But it occurs to me that nukes are less dangerous in space than in the air. No shockwave, for instance. The AT field only has to deal with hard radiation.
Takeda put his feet up on his desk. He wasn't a physicist either, but that seemed to be obvious enough. Nukes are dangerous anywhere. I can't explain how it survived that, but if it can survive even one nuke, then several weapons won't be useful. The AT field was, after all, a field. Yang nodded.
We need to throw away our preconceptions. This war belongs not to the generals, but to those with the creativity and the will to risk it all.
Hey, why don't you take a guess, Shinji-kun?
Misato asked the boy. Shinji's gaze was unfocused, staring past the dark metal walls. Up above, Sahaquiel's scheduled attack slammed into the AT field protecting the city. All over the world, cities were being emptied, populations quickly dispersing. There was surprisingly little looting, as everyone rushed to get as far away as possible. Even the armies kept a distance, to good effect, as the pods would then come raining down, quick and unforgiving upon anyone foolish enough to stay behind. Chaotic caravans blanketed the roads, some people dressed even in their pyjamas carrying on their backs their most prized possessions. Cars had to be abandoned to make the highways clear for the trucks, both military and cargo, that carried hordes well away from the impact sites. Towns along the route were closed up, peering with suspicion upon the descending depossessed masses. Stopping the camp was a grave risk. Such resting places were targets too. However, they couldn't keep running forever. It wasn't just machines that run out of fuel, but human will and temper. He blinked. Misato's father was Dr. Katsuragi, one of the key scientists that broke ground in angel research, in charge of the Antarctic expedition and the experiments upon Adam. Homing laser, Shinji breathed out, though it came out more like homing laser. She gave him a thumbs up sign.
Good job!
Also in accented English. 4 hours, 39 minutes before Sahaquiel reaches Berlin too. NERV Germany was siphoning power from all over to feed an experimental positron cannon. They had no platform for aiming it, and in 5 hours they not only needed to gather the necessary gigawatts, but to store it, build a stable frame for the cannon, then try to fire it off with some degree of accuracy. Impossible, was the judgment of even those working, but it had no choice. Tokyo 3 routinely broke probability. They should be able to live up to the name of NERV too. All over the world, preparations were underway. There was the logistics nightmare of not only securing millions of people, but to feed and shelter them should the crisis drag on. It was deep in the night, at some parts of the world still under attack, while in others it was just around daybreak. The chaos was compounded by severely crippled communications. The military had priority and took up most of landline, fibre optic and satellite links. Vital civilian news services were left in the dark. Even the actual military, tasked to keep order and aid in the rapid evacuations, were only given spare orders, as blind as the people they were told to give assurances to. Most communication towers were either shut down or already blasted into oblivion by Sahaquiel. Every passing moment brought the world closer into panic. It wasn't an end-of-the-world scenario, not yet, but closest to hell on earth as they could see. At least during impact they knew that the worst was already over. Every government was screaming for NERV to hurry up with whatever they could do to stop that thing. Gendo had categorically told them all to shut the hell up and let them do their jobs. They couldn't do any better even if they tried. Even in Nevada, NERV had to mobilise, though they were the least in danger. Their facilities were deep enough underground that the strikes weren't having much effect, but it wouldn't last for long. It was time to get proactive in their defence.
So NERV US already has a functional Evangelion and a pilot?
Asuka said with some disbelief. A screen showed live feed from the site. A black Ava, only floodlights making it visible out of almost midnight.
So, that's Unit 3. I don't know much about it, but it's based on your unit too, but with components more suited for mass production. Its armor is lighter, but compared to standard Ava, its internal battery pack goes up to 12 minutes instead of the emergency 5. Well, it doesn't matter,
Asuka replied to Masato, who was expecting her to make some comment as to the superiority of her Ava.
It's good if we have more. Who's the pilot?
The purple-haired woman looked aside.
Mayumi Hamagishi. She's a US citizen by birth. Still, Unit 3 was supposed to be shipped to Japan anyway. That's convenient. Maybe too convenient. What is this? All 4 pilots have some Japanese ancestry? The odds of that. I'm not buying that the Japanese blood in some way makes us special. It's just hemoglobin, and besides, I'm half that. If they could actually pick pilots that'll make it more convenient for us fighting here, then the candidate list is longer than what they're showing to us.
Masato chuckled.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Most likely they have some other pilots in mind, but decided to show us one that's better suited for our situation before we decide to gank their reserves too.
It wasn't as if NERV Tokyo 3 wouldn't be doing the same thing.
What's her sync ratio?
It was inevitable that she'd ask that, really.
Low 60s. She's not trained for it since childhood like you or Ray, but at least she's not some fresh prodigy like Shinji.
That actually reminded her of something that he'd requested earlier.
This is really the first time she's using the Ava in anything even resembling combat, and... Asuka, would it be too much to ask if you could help her out? Huh? What do you mean? A little encouragement would be nice, I think. Give her pointers on how to use the AT field. This is Unit 3's first full-power test. I'm sure you can imagine the pressure there. America's farther away from the Angels, so there's some delay between attacks. But then the strikes end up hitting harder than those meant for closer.
Asuka leaned back and shrugged.
Well, I don't mind, really. Why me?
She made a thoughtful face for a moment.
Okay, I can imagine Ray not knowing what a pep talk even means, but why not just have Shinji do it? He's better at the speeches.
Yeah, what's up with that? It's like he eats Russian novels for breakfast. Masato laughed at that. If he really could help, then he would have volunteered to do it himself instead of asking her to have Asuka make the call.
I have a feeling it would only make her even more nervous. Besides, we still need him here while we tune up Unit 1 for the operation.
Asuka twitched. Yeah, that too. On second thought, the other pilot was a teenage girl too. Shinji might mean well, but like any teenage boy, he could be so irritatingly obtuse sometimes.
Fine. Don't tell about the plan,
Masato put in before switching off video.
Let's not get anyone's hopes up before we even finish setting up the field test. Sure,
Asuka sighed. She leaned back and waited. The video window to her left showed a surprisingly fluid picture of the goings-on at NERV Nevada. NERV pretty much ganked the throughput of the international network for themselves. Most of the people that might complain were busy running for their lives away from major population centres. Even the sounds were coming in clear. It was a noisier place than Tokyo 3's NERV operation, with sounds of yelling, machinery, alarms, and copters rising in the dry desert air. The lift was a slow, heavy-duty elevator, instead of the Geofront's elegant and hideously expensive electromagnetic rail system. The Evangelion stepped out into the tarmac. Its steps were slow but steady. Then it paused, and Asuka assumed, waiting for orders. She heard the distinctive bleep-bleep sound of opening communications, and a smaller video window popped up.
Hello? Mayumi Hamagishi here, and... Oh my gosh, you're...
The girl abruptly bowed.
Sorry-san, Mayumi Hamagishi desu, and... I know...
Her shoulders shook, and she kept her face down and away from view. Asuka sighed.
You know, I can understand English just fine. I'm sorry.
Her voice was soft.
I didn't mean to insult.
She was just pretending to be a pilot, compared to the growing legend in front of her. What could be a worse way to make a first impression?
Oh, hell no!
Asuka shouted suddenly, startling the other pilot.
I'm not getting a Shinji Mark II. Don't apologise. It's all right. Just relax.
None of the pilots were exactly normal, and it was possible to discern their personalities out of their looks. Her own red hair, her confident smirk, Ray's paleness and unmoved expression, Shinji's melancholic gaze and unhurried movements. Sometimes things are just as they appeared. The girl nodded and looked up. She had long, straight hair and large, round-rimmed eyeglasses. Her face was rounded and held a faint blush of embarrassment. There was nothing in Mayumi's appearance that hinted at anything other than bookishness and terminal shyness. Asuka knew that those glasses were unnecessary while inside the Ava. The pilot was using the Evangelion's retina instead of their own. Even the little comm windows were illusions in the brain, instead of floating on LCL. There was no actual projector inside the entry plug. It was a pretty sophisticated and pilot-intensive system. Wearing glasses, while unnecessary, was a harmless enough affectation. But Asuka also knew that some people used their lenses to wall them off from the world. If there was a barrier between what they could see and reality, they felt somewhat remote and safer emotionally.
Okay, no need to get formal on me. Did you know my nationality's American too? A lot of people assume it's German, but that's where I was born.
She grinned again.
So just call me Asuka. What should I call you? But I'm being sent to Japan anyway. I don't want to be impolite, Asuka-senpai,
Mayumi added, mumbling.
Fine, Mayu-chan.
The girl on the screen was shaking visibly in fear of her disapproval.
Or would you prefer Yumi-chan? Yumi, please. So.
As the world was engulfed in turmoil, the misgivings of two teenage girls appeared insignificant, but they had chanced to be those whose every action might be of critical importance. An uncomfortable silence dragged on.
Want some tips on using the Ava?
Asuka asked after a while. It was pretty much the only thing they had in common. Immeasurably relieved, the other girl bowed.
I'd really appreciate any help you could give me.
Asuka was the official team leader of NERV's Evangelions. Since Tokyo 3 held all the veteran Avas, by extension she was the primary of all Ava pilots all over the world. Shinji may have his talents, but she'd been trained to the Evangelion's tactics and capabilities. She knew the technology. Even Shinji acknowledged her experience in it, and their battlefield relationship was more like an officer and her NCO. However, she dealt with her friends as equals both in and out of the Ava. Now a fourth pilot. It reminded her of her responsibilities. Things can't be expected to remain the same forever, and she had her own part to play for the greater good. In that, one didn't need to bring another down just to feel superior.
So this is your first real test of the IT field? What did they tell you to do? Evangelion Unit 3 is to use its AT field as a shield defense against incoming bombardment. The AT field must be spread out as wide and held as solid as possible.
Asuka snorted.
As expected from those who don't have any idea how that actually works.
She looped a strand of her hair around her finger as she thought. She didn't see Mayumi imitating that thinking motion.
Controlling the Ava. It's a subjective experience. The AT field is invisible after all. There's no truly efficient way of making it function.
She looked back to the screen, enough to see Mayumi wincing in pain for some reason. Her head jerked to one side. She sighed.
So, how does the AT field feel? How do you know it's really out there?
The new pilot squirmed in her seat.
It's hard to explain. It's like a warm blanket, I suppose.
Asuka nodded. Comfort, security, the feeling of power. It made her feel safe.
We synchronize with the Ava. The Ava generates the field, AT field, and then we have to consciously maintain the field. It all happens here.
She tapped at her head.
There should be no difference between your will and the AT field. It's there because you want it to be. When an angel comes, send the field out like saying, this far and no farther. Synchro ratios, power flows, they're just incidentals. Your shield is as strong as your will to resist. Remember that. But my AT field isn't that strong.
Asuka groaned. She'd better things to do than feed a collapsed ego. Well, she had been told before that her ego was what actually made her so quick with the Ava.
You don't believe in yourself, do you? But it's not all right if you let those that depend upon you die.
Oh, great. She looks like she wants to cry.
Hey, Hamagishi! Listen! If you can't believe in yourself, then believe in the me who... Fuck it, I'm not finishing that. So you?
Asuka heard a bleep bleep noise, and Masato's face opened up in a side window.
The preparations are complete. Shinji's coming up. Let him handle the defense for a while. You and Raid better get to your positions. All right.
She turned to the other window.
There's nothing to be afraid of. We'll kill this angel. And you? Protect him. I know you're strong enough for that.
She then grinned and made a V sign into the screen.
Hang in there, Yumi-chan.
She looked forward and her grin turned feral.
All right, Unit 2. Here we go.
The screen shrank and disappeared. Putting the incident out of her mind, Asuka surged the Ava down the hillsides towards the lake. 4 hours, 26 minutes before 0 hour, Masato's Operation Skythread was put into action. All the way across the world, a bespectacled girl fell back onto her cockpit, letting off a relieved breath, or gurgle. She stared into the dark, distant sky.
So that's Asuka Langley saw you,
Mayumi said to herself, a tiny little smile on her face.
She's a calm person.
Her comms bleeped and the base commander's face showed on screen.
What? Starstruck, Havagishi? Wipe that look off your face, we've got incoming!
Ah, yes, sir.
The Black Ava extended its arms and let loose its AT field.
Ready!
Moments later, 2 high-velocity strikes slammed into the invisible barrier, the pods bursting and expanding. A massive explosion lit up the desert. She screamed in pain. Sergeant de Leon saluted. Attention! Mana saluted back quickly.
So, you bought 'em?
She stared up at the 2 young men by the sergeant's side. Their faces were stony and their gazes straight ahead, hiding their nervousness well.
Corporal Jiro Takeda, reporting for duty, Mom.
Corporal Vince Nagato, reporting for duty, Mom. They were supposed to be the new elite, not out of command school like she was, but meant for fighting. They were 18, old enough that the JSSDF wouldn't take flak for sending children out to battle. She wondered if it bothered them that they were chosen because they were disposable that way. Probably not. These were the replacements for her dearest friends. Mana Kirishima was not amused.
Kirishima!
Someone shouted from behind.
Hey, wait up, would you?
A faint crease crossed their faces. Who dared to be so disrespectful? It was, of course, Kensuke. It was getting rather windy, but fortunately his new workman's coat was weighed down with tools and devices. It was to protect against heat and acids. He looked ridiculous, like a midget fireman.
Hey, how's the arm, Kirishima?
He asked, rather abruptly. Rudely even. A sliver of warmth returned to Mana's expression. She lifted her left arm out and opened her fingers. The limb spasmed slightly.
It's not like I really need this to fight with Magno's Tancred. Alright, I'm sorry. I'll try not to abuse the mechanisms in the future.
Kensuke sniffed.
That's made in imitation of human flesh, and flesh is weak.
Mana nodded. A few moments passed, with the late afternoon winds blowing. Her black skirt fluttered a bit, while Kensuke had his hands in his pockets to keep his coat from flapping open. The silence ached for some reason.
Anyway, tell Shinji I said hi. Thanks for protecting him, Kirishima. He needs us more than he thinks.
Mana smiled slightly.
Alright. You. Stay safe, Kirishima.
Kensuke then grinned while pushing up his glasses.
When you come back, I think I have something to make that arm better.
They turned away from each other. Nothing more needed to be said. Minutes later, Magno's Tancred set out towards the staging site, fixed up in Hellfire configuration. Its right arm was replaced by dual-linked positron large armament solid-state cannons, similar to that used by Unit 0. This was better than its own, the hard-mounted positron cannon, in that it may be aimed up and down with little difficulty and greater accuracy. The left torso, which should have artillery missile dispensers replacing the megabolter, instead held expanded battery and heatsink packs. On its back was a massive flame, like a flag banner. The Trident logo shone out in a contained holographic matrix. Vertical tubes on its side were targeting radar pods. The dreadnought rolled into action. Another thing that could be blamed on Kensuke. To save wear and tear on the tarmac, in his made-for-it treaded shoes that could be taken off easily. On-road speed was rather leisurely 40 kilometers per hour, but then Tokyo 3 was just 2.5 kilometers away.
The homing laser is actually a Tannhauser thought experiment similar to Einstein's relativistic trains, Ritsuko explained while the Evangelion set up the equipment. This is why Tannhauser postulates the subspace is bright and gravity is like ugly black stains on the cosmos.
Makoto raised his hand.
Yes, Yuga-kun? You have a question?
Pardon me, Akagi-sensei, but I don't understand it at all. How does that help us right now? She sighed.
It doesn't. The homing laser idea is actually just that. We plan to make a laser that can home into the Angel using the Ava's AT fields. The AT fields in this case will serve the perfect medium to contain the energy.
Ritsuko was too busy to actually write papers, which was a pity. She'd rather have a Nobel for creating the perfect cup of tea.
Isn't there a limit to how far an Ava can spread its AT field?
Kaji asked.
Spread? Yes, When the intention is to pack it as tight as possible, then the field may propagate itself the same way an EM field exists around wires with current. All it really needs is a power source, which the Ava provides.
They were all watching from the safety of NERV's command centre. The new shelters were drilled deeper into the hills. Trident base was far enough from the action, but they too retreated to their bunkers. No one wanted to be around when NERV sets off a series of ground-level nukes, or nuke equivalents in the form of N2 mines. 3 hours, 9 minutes before the Angels reach Berlin 2. "No offence meant, Masato," Kaji commented while looking up at the screen. Too bad NERV had a strict no-smoking policy inside the command centre, as the situation dearly called for a light. The place was big enough that it shouldn't really matter, but Geno probably wanted to make sure no one gets any enjoyment whatsoever when doing their duty. "This plan doesn't sound like you. That actually makes it all the more amazing." The woman stuck her tongue out a bit.
"Well, I can't claim to take credit for all of it. You know how it is. I get a crazy idea. Ritz-chan tries to make it fit to reality."
Her voice then turned serious.
"We've done this before, actually. It's not totally new, so this should work."
Kaji fought back.
"The jet alone incident, you mean?"
"Yeah. There we knew that an Ava can contain a nuclear explosion. Then against that angel that buries underground, we accidentally found out we can use the AT field to home into something."
But will it really reach all the way across the world?
The typical Masato solution to that is more power, more enthusiasm, kick reason to the curb and charge straight ahead,
Ritsuko put in, approaching with a smile on her face.
"Just because it worked once doesn't mean it's not supposed to be impossible." "Oh, hi, Ritsuko,"
Masato giggled a bit.
"But so what? A true technician doesn't know or care what the hell she's doing until she's actually halfway done with it."
Ritsuko groaned.
"Don't brag. Please. Just don't."
She then nodded briefly to Kaji.
"Better get back to your observation post. Masato, the pilots are on site. Let's get this done." The layered AT field may be used not just as a shield, but to direct particles. Two Evangelions working together can create a perfect particle accelerator.
Note to self, see about particle acceleration experiments. Make up a sufficiently exorbitant amount of lease for the Ava's time for scientific activities, as a glorious ha in your face to those who continue to refuse giving her a Nobel.
With this, we can create an attack superior to a charged positron beam, but it's time-consuming and prevents the Ava from doing anything else, even defending themselves.
The main screen showed the video clip against Sandalphon. The video stopped, then replayed the positron beam doing almost a 90-degree turn in mid-air to follow the angel underground.
Instead of positrons, raw plasma with an AT field wrapped around it. If the enemy had simply appeared over our airspace, this would have been our next step if the heavy positron cannon failed to penetrate the AT field.
"Ah, this is good," the Prime Minister said from his observation deck off to the right side of the command centre. "I see NERV still has several tricks up its sleeve. Is this the plan?"
Ritsuko shook her head.
Unfortunately, it has several shortcomings. First of all, the time required to get it to work. Hot plasma has a tendency to diffuse, and while the AT field might prevent that, it loses effective energy as distance increases. It will considerably thin out over several thousand kilometers. The moment it's released, we'll have to wait several minutes up to an hour to charge up for the next attack.
"Rectifier is always important," General Akira put in. "If you miss, you can always try again, and if you didn't, it allows you to inflict more damage on the enemy."
Precisely. Now, what we need to do here is to be able to either pump energy into the attack at determined intervals, or give it enough energy in one shot to create a sufficiently powerful beam.
Ritsuko nodded briefly down to the JSSDF desk.
Hence, the nukes. Since we don't have any dirty bombs, we have to make do with the N2 mines. We'll just have to set off more of them to get the same effect.
The military had already been briefed. The civilians and government officials had to wait for the pre-action briefing. Masato then took over at that point.
We'll use Ray and Asuka's layered AT field to contain the energy of an N2 explosion. We modified one of NERV's external Ava catapults to shoot N2 mines into the air. Unit 1 will then contain the bomb, we'll detonate it from here, and she'll direct and compress the explosion. Asuka will then hold the released energy. If the AT field can deflect explosions, then it can act as a shell around it. And Ritsuko, the angel? Yes, we theorize this is the reason the Angel can survive so many nuclear explosions. Much as an electromagnetic field contains plasma inside our fusion reactors, so could the Angel screen and divert energy from the explosions. There is a pressure wave when this happens inside an atmosphere, hitting the AT field all at once, which is why it's more damaging and more difficult to resist. Presumably, the Angel has a powerful AT field specially adapted to this purpose.
Masato thanked her and continued her plan.
Asuka has an immensely strong AT field, but even if we don't need to provide energy for the beam, the AV will still suck power like mad to maintain the field. For this reason, we have to again borrow power from all Japan to reinforce our power grid. It should take no more than 5 minutes between shots, provided everything goes well. The resulting beam won't be plasma or positrons, but a bomb-pumped X-ray laser, Ritsuko added. The Angel might be able to disperse massive nuclear detonations, but not a concentrated attack in one spot. If needed, we can continue to pump more and more energy until we break through. Really, there isn't anything here that we haven't done before, only this time we're trying it on a massive scale. There's no particular reason it shouldn't work.
Gendo looked at his watch. 2 hours, 4 minutes before the enemy reaches NERV Germany.
Are we fully prepared to begin this operation?
He asked.
All preparations complete, sir.
Then you may proceed.
The initial run consisted of a single medium N2 mine, by itself not enough to even really damage the Ava, and a prepared target over a mountain. 3 pilots knew its location and were ordered to consciously aim their thoughts at it. It went off without a hitch. A large canister tumbled into the air. Ray caught it and let it explode between her hands. The explosion arched as if being drawn into Unit 2 and spun around Asuka. There were 2 overlapping fields, with hers the larger and more solid. After some time, Unit 1 then dug its fingers into the glowing ring, and from the opposite side a glowing thread shot out, unknowingly curved over the mountains and towards the target. The 10 by 10 metre target of white canvas over a metal frame then ceased to be. Cheering rose in the command centre. However, Ritsuko was frowning.
It's not enough, she said. We need more than that if we plan to break through. We can count on neutralizing the enemy's AT field with just a containment field. Can we adjust the diameter of the beam?
The pilots made sounds equivalent to hell no. I don't fucking know.
We still have slightly less than 1,000 N2 mines here,
Masato replied, grinning.
The JSSDF was so nice to lend them to us.
Strangely, NERV had to pay for assets they acquired from the UN. Every N2 mine they directly used they had to treat as bought. That Gendo could order 999 N2 mines to be used against Lelel in a different place and time, spoke to the depths of their resources.
I don't think we'll use up any more than 100 here. The problem is just how much can the Ava handle? If the AT field fails, we might as well have just nuked ourselves. It's a great risk. We don't have time to test by the numbers,
Asuka put into the command channel.
Firing it off releases most of the strain anyway. All right, Asuka. Remember, we have to almost double the amount every time. We're counting on you.
Asuka nodded. Tokyo 3 might feel more like home to her, but Germany held many memories, both precious and painful. She wanted to keep them, and she would punish the Angel that dared attack it. A part of her still belonged there. She bared her teeth in a wide, shark-like grin. There was nothing like the feeling of holding the fury of a sun, forcing it into compliance with her force of will alone.
Katsuragi-san, the Angel has just launched 4 more bombardment pods towards us. Impact in 17 minutes. This is a good test for our ranged accuracy. Ray, prepare to receive and direct 3 N2 mines. Asuka, raise and maintain the field for around 5 minutes. We have to set them off one by one. And Shinji, don't think of anything else. Watch the screen and visualize. The beam should hit intercept 1 before it even passes Mongolia. We can try again 3 more times before we just have to let it hit us.
Understood, Masato-san.
I'm worried,
Maya said aside to Makoto.
His sync ratio's still so low.
It was right there in front of her. 0, 79, 1, 61, 2, 84.
I hope he doesn't push himself too hard.
While she believed he could still do it, she also knew that he was entirely too willing to damage himself in reaching for the impossible. It was only 3 days since he woke up. He shouldn't have to suffer again so soon. He'll get through this. Don't worry, he replied. Our job's to sit here, and if we can't fight, then we can just believe. Shigeru sighed and casually put his hands behind his head. He leaned back to relax, then remembered Gendo was watching. He straightened up. It must be nice to taunt probability, he said with a grin. True enough, I suppose. But it's not like anything we imagine here will do anything over there. The pilots and the technology. With these, we should be all right.
Target status!
Shigeru switched on his headset. Angels maintaining present speed and heading. Bombardment pods arriving in 14 minutes, 15 seconds. Currently entering Mongolian airspace.
All right, Asuka?
The team didn't answer, concentrating fully.
Shinji, commence counterattack!
A pillar of light rose up to and beyond the sky. Contrary to expectations, it didn't home in immediately towards the Angel. Awareness was what let the AT field function. It wasn't something that could be generated mechanically and separate from the Ava. It went straight up, then bent sharply towards the horizon. It was fast, yet at the same time unbearably slow. The X-ray laser should be invisible, as the AT field wrapping should prevent it from ionizing the air around it. Hell, it was in space! Not only was it still glowing white hot, but its progress could be tracked by the naked eye, hardly a light speed weapon. More than that, it wasn't even moving in a straight line. It seemed to follow the contours of the surface beneath, as if it could track via surrounding data, which made absolutely no sense to Ritsuko.
It's a goddamn beam! The AT field's wrapped around it. How can it be aware of its own location?
She looked around and saw Masato looking so satisfied, like a fat cat under the warm sun.
Maybe I should consider being an alcoholic instead. Note to self, make a list of people to taunt with the idea of a megaparticle. Let's share the suffering.
Ritsuko, softly cackling madly, had sadly become a common enough occurrence that everyone there simply no longer even noticed it. The Angel's bombardment pods were matte black spheres of ceramic, metallic, and various other compounds that didn't even exist in nature. They were visible only via helpful red circle marks on the main screen.
Which one, Shinji?
Masato whispered. The beam struck the leftmost pod, and for a second its energy shield actually held. The circle seemed to stop in comparison to the others, then exploded spectacularly, the bit having been boring right through and then fading away.
Yeah!
Masato shouted.
Ready, number 2! Hey, I felt that,
Asuka said softly, her eyes still closed.
We hit it. What the hell's an AT field?
Ritsuko thought as the event repeated itself.
It's like the giant robot's Swiss Army knife.
She touched her lips and licked at her finger, aching for a cigarette as well.
If I can just isolate the specific organ. Damn it. There's too much at stake here. We need to figure this out and quickly.
She looked aside towards Gendo.
Cutting open the clones won't tell you how this is even possible. We learned that long ago.
The second bombardment pod was destroyed in the same manner as the first. The third? Strange. It's drifting off course. Ritsuko nodded at Shigeru's comment.
As expected, they do have some form of terminal guidance.
'Cause they have their own damn AT field.
How are the Avas?
No sweat, said Asuka, her face frowning anyway. The LCL was blocking her pause, making that a literal impossibility. Masato looked at the time displayed on the corner of the main screen. It takes about 2 minutes for the beam to cross the distance. 2 to 3 to set things up below.
This is good, she said. It's working, it's really working.
Maybe a little too well. Her plans always end up getting derailed somehow. After all, she knew snafu was a fact of life.
Begin the third attack.
The beam hit the pod. The pod shone, then continued on. Motherfuck! It strengthened the field, Kaji noted with disbelief. How can the Angel do that? It's not even connected anymore. Ritsuko smirked. You have an explanation for this, Doctor? Gendo said from above.
Give me the Angel again.
The view shifted to show Sahaquiel in full form.
Notice that its centre mass is occupied by a great eye. Its 2 main appendages each have an eye with 5 nubs radiating out. Here along the main body are 2 more unused nubs which appear like lashes. It may seem as the secondary masses are like splayed hands, but we may consider these connections as the 6th nub.
Interesting. But what does that have to do with the bombardment attack? Futsuki asked.
The attacks are made from spheres grown at the end of these tertiary nubs. The main body and the appendages share similar features. So far, we have no proof that the Angels are even in any way male or female.
Her glasses glinted, though Lilith seemed to have breasts for no particular reason, since they lack nipples anyway.
Therefore, parthenogenesis, or to coin a pun, parthenonemesis.
Oh, asexual reproduction, the sub-commander continued. But does that even really apply here? This angel is the largest living organism we've ever seen.
There's so much we don't understand about the AT field, but one thing's clear, it can't be duplicated mechanically. It requires conscious will to function.
I shall name this principle, and the impossibility of figuring it out, the Oars effect. Ever get the feeling Akagi-sensei is actually smart enough to say one thing while thinking something else entirely? Shigeru whispered to Makoto.
How mean!
Maya had to defend her senpai.
She's not deliberately inscrutable.
She's not that hard to figure out. You just need to read the subtitle of her thoughts. It's got the distinctive yellow italic font. Yours is green, Maya gets light blue. Unless this is a dub, in which case you might miss it against the background noise. His friend stared intently at him. I said nothing. This conversation never happened, he added quickly. And so, it was. It was too silly to exist. What you just heard must have been your phone, or speakers playing up, or something.
If we simply leave the angel alone, I wonder if it will ever really complete the vision or create a lattice of sorts. In any case, the angel sends out attacks which have the characteristic of first hitting with kinetic force, then exploding, or alternatively bursting into multiple explosive pods.
It's a goddamn bolter, General Akira muttered. The bastards duplicated the effects of our bolters.
Not exactly, but I agree there is a resemblance.
She shrugged.
In any case, the solution is simple. Masato, go ahead, without fear, and slam into the fourth wall at Mach speed! Ray, load up and detonate 3 mines! Asuka will contain and focus the energy. And Shinji, see if adding more makes it harder to control. This feeling of being pissed off I cannot contain.
Ritsuko twitched, reaching into her pockets and bringing out several pencils. She snapped each one by one, then began breaking the pieces until she couldn't get a good grip anymore. She took a deep breath and calmed down.
Masato, for your sake I'll assume you're referring to the idealization of a time barrier, or in this instance the need for haste over hesitation.
The third bombardment pod was destroyed. Adding more power didn't seem to give any control problems. The angel is accelerating, Shigeru shouted.
Of course, it's the smart thing to do now that we can actually try to take it out. Is it still headed for Berlin too?
Yes, ma'am. At present speed, calculations put it only 1 hour, 5 minutes.
Oh, that's much faster. We can still catch up.
Masato then turned to Ritsuko, who seemed to be humming something about survival of the fittest in a lullaby.
Could you give me a safe estimate on how many bombs we need to set off? There are 2 ways we can do this. Either we set off 30 bombs one by one, which takes around 1 minute to put into containment, or 2 or more at once, reducing our refire delay to 15 minutes, but puts far greater strain on the pilots and their AT field.
Second option, the pilots, Masato and Gendo, said all together. They blanched at the realization.
Asuka, remember that if this attack fails, we will have to increase the yield of the next one. While we're on a time constraint here, there is some leeway. Too sudden a jump in what you need to keep compressed might be too much.
Ritsuko said that out of concern.
Don't underestimate me,
the girl shot back.
I can do this. You know I can.
The last statement conveyed a certain pleading indignation. Of all the people in NERV, she expected Ritsuko to actually hold some rational belief in her abilities. The scientist smiled thinly.
Very well then. Let's kick reason aside and reach for the impossible.
She began to chuckle.
After all, what's the most important thing here? Killing the enemy!
Asuka shouted.
No, wait! Saving NERV Germany! We need to conserve our resources so we can effectively kill even more of the enemy!
Who? Ray added in an attempt at a group cheer. Shinji just looked sheepish. Oh, so she did learn her lesson well, Futsuki said to Gendo. I still believe you shouldn't think so much of replacements for the people you don't happen to like. Useless things should be removed, he responded. Nostalgia. Another useless concept. Don't be surprised if you get a dagger to the back. One made of iron, presumably. Thum! The energy lanced out, sending the air crackling in its wake. Everyone watched breathless as the beam approached the angel. The screen flared as the homing laser met its AT field. It was a titanic struggle in the total silence of space.
Come on! Come on!
Masato chanted. It was pointless to try and calculate the energy contained within the beam, Ritsuko had said. The sheer violence of that impact, AT field against AT field, is creating and destroying exotic particles the longer it goes on. Since the glowing ring persists at the moment of release, presumably Asuka and Shinji pack it in at megatons a second. Then the stalemate broke. Sahaquiel, with eerie elegance, flapped its appendages and tilted. Its field dropped and the beam continued, missing its body just barely. You missed! Damn it, Shinji! Asuka shook her fist at him through the comm window. He was betraying the mental image of super competence she had of him. Can't you turn it back? Ah, too late now! She felt the beam fade away. God damn! Do you think you can do better, Pilot Tsuyu? Ray asked. Maybe, but my consistently higher sync ratio's more useful here. She slapped her right hand at her controls and raved up, like an impatient overseer. Hurry up with the mines! She'd never really stopped competing. However, at least she knew that the others wouldn't hold her back. They were freaks of nature. She was the badass normal in this setting. Like hell was she let herself slip even a little. They get those powers, those skills, as if a matter of course. Ta! Those who fought for every bit of power and prowess would have greatness unquestioned. Charge me up! She shouted. Her voice was rasping. Hurry! 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 Asuka! Take it easy. 30 and 2 mines in under 30 minutes. We still have 2 more chances after this. Masato turned aside towards Makoto. Wait. Hold on. After several minutes, she returned. NERV Germany finished setting up their positron cannon. After watching our encounter feed, they want to see if we can possibly make something of a combined operation. An intriguing proposition, Katsuragi, Gendo commented. Can it be done? Ritsuko shrugged. It's all about timing. However, if we can strike at the angel from 2 sides at the same time, there's a greater possibility of weakening its field enough for either shot to break through. She read the data about the cannon's capabilities. They had 8 hours to gather the power to use against Ramil. Out of just under 4, what NERV Berlin 2 managed to gather was impressive. They must have bled the country dry, ruining entire power networks, even more so considering they had to coordinate mass evacuations and relocate their essential government elsewhere all at the same time. It'd be better if our attack strikes first. They have only 1 shot at this. Asuka closed her eyes and leaned back into her seat. Germany. If that angel lands, then everything about her past will be wiped off the face of the earth. Even if the memories were bad, without them she'd feel rootless. Oh, and millions of people would be dead or homeless. Look at them, trying to act calm like they know what they're doing, she said in a whisper, heard only by those who were meshed to her AT field. It sickens me. We're the ones who actually have to do all the work. Just stop holding us back. More than anyone, it's we who need to remain calm and think things through, Asuka. How can you stay calm in this situation, Shinji? They're depending on me. It's too much pressure. We need to get it done. Get it through. Damn it. Don't you care that the angel's killing more and more people while we wait? Shinji opened his eyes a fraction. LCL was temperature controlled to keep the pilots comfortable. Nevertheless, for a moment it seemed to drop. Then he sighed again. That's why we need to make sure that when the time comes, the enemy will have nothing to do but die. Nothing will save it. Nothing can bring it back. He looked to the distance. They're relying on us, but wars, really, are such a waste of the Ava's power. That's a nice thought, but it's too long-ranged. This is where we are now, and this is what we need to be. She sniffed. I'm doing everything that I can. Don't mess this up for me. Ah, how she layers her fears in bravado. A voice broke through Shinji's thoughts. A beautiful paradox, is it not, my young king? This world is full of such contradictions. In lies, truth. In death, life. Perhaps in failure, victory. Masato gave the orders. Asuka! Alright already. We're boosting power to your Ava's umbilical. Shinji, we'll have you run off your team modules for a while. Ray, get ready! Phase 2 commenced at 48 minutes before Sahaquiel reaches Berlin 2. Asuka grit her teeth as she contained the boiling fury of 50 N2 mines. Ray helped, but her AT shield only formed the inner shell of the Taurus. The 2 Evangelions stood back to back. Unit 1's distinctive Titan frame was nearby, hunched over, its fingers twitching. Begin! Shouted Masato. Principio Eternus roared and plunged an arm into the pulsating ring. At the other side, the homing beam shot out. Shinji and Asuka screamed at the same time, both in pain. Sahaquiel moved quickly, and the beam struck at the edge of its field. The beam went on, but then impossibly began to curve back. The angel's great eye blinked. The fields clashed once again, with the beam whipping about like a fisherman's line. Then from the west, another beam of light. Sahaquiel had to shift its field structure from omnidirectional to planar, thickening under the assault. As such, the positron lance caught it completely by surprise. The shot tore at its white flesh and separated one of its appendages. That dispatched body part tumbled away. "No!" Ritsuko yelled. She rushed towards the monitors. "Contact NERV Germany! Tell them to seek shelter now!"
"What's wrong?" asked the Prime Minister. "We damaged it, didn't we?"
Sahaquiel began spinning. The appendage shortly began to as well. Its eye opened and began to blacken, with veins bulging and advancing upon the cornea. Still spinning, it released the bombardment pods it still had, one by one, towards the source of the attack. Then it stopped spinning. It had turned into one black bead with tail-like outgrowths. It began to fall. "Budding," Ritsuko said softly. "Now we have 2 angels for the price of 1. The new impact estimate might be reduced, but it would still be catastrophic in scope." "It's moving much faster," Makoto reported. 7 minutes. "Shinji, leave the angel alone. Stop that thing. If we don't get it with the homing laser now, we won't make it in time for the next attack." "But..." Principio Eternus snarled and pushed down, taking its arm clear off the ring. The arm was hot enough to leave the air steaming as it passed. The illogical laser, thousands of kilometers away, made another sharp turn and streaked towards the target. Sahaquiel took that chance to lower its field and spin frantically. It released its own remaining bombardment pods, though with its unbalanced mass its vector then drifted away from Berlin 2. "Ah! That angel!" "Track them!" Masato shouted. The main screen showed 2 heading towards Berlin 2, 1 towards Russian territory and 2 more across Europe. "Looks like we have to hope those aren't aimed at anything too important. The most immediate threat is the angel." "I'll just have to destroy this one," Shinji said aloud. "Masato-san! Ray! Pump up this laser! Asuka! I can handle it! We're losing power by the second anyway!" "Major, I request detonation override over the mines," Ray asked. "Granted," Gendo put in. Time pressure aside, if any of the other pilots had requested, he wouldn't have given permission. Ray was rigidly reliable, and disposable that way. Unit 0 picked up an N2 mine. It exploded in its hand. A burning white globe seethed between its fingers. It shoved that ball into the ring. Another mine. From bending down to detonation to containment, the act took around 40 seconds. The angel was dodging the beam. The smaller copy held its own AT field, but the skies over Germany was witness to perhaps the craziest dogfight since the Red Baron flew overhead. Sahaquiel, Maine, placed itself between the homing laser and its escaping bud, deflecting the beam. The angel could alternate easily between using its AT field for propulsion or defense. Why it didn't do this before possibly might have to do with having no attention left to spare from regenerating and targeting. Unit 0 is feeding bombs into the source like a locomotive engineer of days past. The analogy did apply in many ways. Asuka was like a druggie, getting higher and higher, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. She was laughing. Such power! There was no extreme sport quite like Fusion Ball. Any other weapon will have to deal with waste heat. The AT field laser doesn't even have to touch anything in macro space. Ritsuko watched Asuka struggling on. Shinji's eyes were closed as he continually guided something he shouldn't even be able to perceive. "Faster!" Asuka shouted. "We need to be faster! God damn it, isn't this supposed to be a C-speed weapon?" "It's not a weapon. It's an event." Ritsuko gave in to her expository impulses. "The speed of light varies from water, air, or vacuum. The AT field does bend space enough that the distortion is even visible sometimes." "Then why isn't the AT field faster?" The Red Ava stumbled for a moment. "Keep your focus, Asuka!" Masato interrupted, fortunately saving them from a long explanation that would ultimately lead nowhere. "Shinji! What are you doing?" The sky was like some daddiest mural, with bright lines zigzagging and curving all over the place. "It's hard enough trying to follow the enemy. Controlling this beam's like throwing around a line with a weighted end. The slightest change can make it overcorrect. The enemy has incredible mobility," Shinji hissed through grit teeth. "If this hits the ground..." The homing laser was fast, but the enemy's own AT field relied upon the attack's own braking front to push itself aside. Of course, if fields can be solid enough against each other, and we can push using them, sensing and predicting where I should go is child's play. Principio Eternus roared and jabbed both hands into the glowing ring. In the distance, the beam split. Confused on which way to dodge, the nub remained still. It didn't seem to have any real intelligence, merely instinct. "Now, die!" Shinji shouted, as the homing laser drilled through the angel's defences. The spherical nub exploded violently, causing the view to dissolve into static. Perhaps too violently. "We've lost satellites over Germany. Switching to secondary monitors," Shigeru said. "Angel is alone." "It seems to be trying to regrow bombardment pods," Makoto added. "It's not changing course. It seems to have given up on Berlin too." "That was a nuclear detonation!" Misato shouted in consternation. "What about the pod set ahead?" There was another explosion, and this time close by. The view in the main screen shook, and after a while cleared to show that Units 1 and 2 had been blasted clear of the crater where they once stood. Unit 0, crouched nearby, was unscathed. It crossed its arms and let down its field. "There was containment failure," Ray reported. "The blast has been successfully directed upwards." "Shinji and Asuka are unconscious," Mai reported. "All signs stable. No damage to the Avers, but—" "Activate the simulant packs in their suits," Ritsuko advised. "Activating. No response, Senpai. Their brain waves are in a coma-like state." "What? Damn it, the last time it took 3 weeks for Shinji to wake up!" Misato pulled at her hair. "How much time do we have? Is there anything those in NERV Germany can do?" 65 seconds, said Makoto. The main screen showed red triangles converging upon a single point. The minutes stretched by in terrible slowness. Then, the triangles disappeared. The satellite view showed a rising fireball. It would be pointless to try and contact them immediately afterwards. They had to let a few more agonizing minutes pass. "NERV Berlin 2, please respond. This is Tokyo 3, can you hear us? Please respond." After a while, Shigeru leaned back on his head and exhaled. He took the headset off and said dully, "We've lost contact with NERV Germany." Maya was crying openly. There was much gnashing of teeth. Only Gendo seemed unaffected, but that in itself was a sign of severe displeasure. "Damn!" Kaji slammed both fists down on the deck. "Damn! Damn! Damn! And after everything, how could we let this happen?" "In retrospect," Ritsuko sighed wearily, "those missiles were rather old technology, weren't they? Given the devastation they were supposed to do, fitting them with precision sight or IR-based guidance systems would be pointless. Most of them was constructed before those technologies were even available." General Manara, from below, winced and spoke up. "True, most ICBMs are designed to strike at fixed targets, and as such, rely on—" he palmed his face. "Radar guidance." "And the Angels just love to foul up radar," General Akira added. "So set the warheads to detonate at a set distance. Or since radar is radio detection and ranging, at impact. Most likely. Both. But even if the Angel does swallow the warheads, how can it detonate?" Ritsuko waved dismissively at the Prime Minister. "A nuclear bomb at its heart is just a block of uranium. A strong enough blast will set off a chain reaction. The Angels have no problem causing massive explosions." "If the Angel could do this, Dr. Akagi, why did you think that he could not use these bombs in bombardment before this?" "I cannot make judgments on the enemy's intentions, merely the science behind their capabilities." Ritsuko shrugged. Off the top of her head, it might be that the Angel was unwilling to entertain the thought that crude tools made by humans to kill humans could be better at the task than its own supremely efficient bioweapons, or that for some reason such a pod couldn't take advantage of an AT field. Nukes were also considerably dirtier than kinetic strikes. "The other pods released. Are they nukes too?" "We won't know until they land in about 8 more minutes. Even if we warned them, there's not much they can do in that time." "We should know," Gendo interrupted. "Informing the governments may be possible, but even they will withhold this information from those affected.
It serves no point. If civilians are far enough from the blast, they will not be harmed excessively. If the pods are aimed at civilian gathering zones, then there will only be a few moments of disbelief, then nothing else. I'll deal with this myself. He put his hands down and let his glasses glint. Better to know. What about the pilots?
They're still unconscious, sir,
Mai responded.
their wave patterns are like sleep now. Should we remove them, senpai?
She shook her head slowly.
We should exhaust all methods we have of waking them from inside the plug.
14 minutes after Sahaquiel passed Berlin 2, and 7 hours before it reaches NERV, Nevada, Asuka woke up. She blinked and pushed herself up.
Shinji! What?
Asuka reached for the controls.
Masato! The angel? I'm sorry, Asuka.
The red-haired pilot's face, such raw anguish there.
No.
She hugged herself.
It can't be. Please, it can't be!
Berlin 2 remains. In 5, or at most 10 years, it will be habitable again. Given the anti-radiation methods we have now, recovery of intact assets may begin within at least 2 weeks. The Evangelion parts might still be around. Asuka's eyes bulged. She shut off contact to the command center. Hush, Hikari,
Fuyutsuki whispered aside. Hush. Did you enjoy that?
What do you think?
Shinji woke up a short while later. His question immediately upon regaining reason was much the same. So, at least it wasn't wiped off the face of the earth. As long as the people live, the city survives. He rubbed at his face. They might still return. He thought in much the same way as his father, to no one's surprise. The angel. Where is it?
It's over the Atlantic Ocean right now.
I see. Unit 1 turned towards Unit 2, which was tearing into the mountain with its own fists and hands, pounding and clawing at the rocks. So this isn't about defending lives anymore. It's about revenge. The red Evangelion screamed its fury to the heavens.
80!
said Asuka.
Don't be ridiculous,
Masato responded.
50 N2 mines at one time was the most you could contain, and that blew up in your face. It's more than enough. No! When Shinji managed to split the beam, I felt the drain double. If I don't keep the flow constant, it's going to weaken. So I need a larger pool of energy. The angel's farther away now.
Asuka clenched her fist.
This is the best thing I can do right now. I won't fail here.
So be it, Soryu. Make sure you're up to it.
Thank you, sir,
she replied towards Gendo.
My mother's grave. Is it even still there?
The people. Maybe they were far enough. They were homeless, yet they were alive. She'd never felt so German, really, until that moment. So sure in her worth. She should live long enough to see the angels dead. All of them. Better still if she could die, dragging them into hell with her, and there to endlessly battle to ensure they would never bother delivering again. Asuka!
Don't say anything, Shinji, she whispered. Don't offer me useless consolations. Kill the damn thing and I'll be satisfied.
Shigeru spoke up with,
A communique from NERV America. The last attack knocked out their pilot. They don't think they can withstand any more of that.
The rest of the world chimed in with their status soon after.
More cities and refugee sites were hit. The military now ordered to keep the people from actually moving around.
The video feed showed Mayumi Hamagishi being put into a stretcher. Asuka cursed something incomprehensible. Another window showed UN forces blocking a road. The escorts aimed their APC light cannons back, uncertain without orders but driven by the need to protect civilians. The main screen then flashed and turned to static.
What just happened?
Masato asked.
The satellite's gone, ma'am. Switching to backup observation line.
Flash. That too broke up.
Replaying last frames.
Okay. Freeze there. Damn!
Masato began to pace around.
It's got some sort of beam attack now.
That's not surprising. The angels have proven capable of generating functions on the fly. The first angel we fought proved that, growing a second head for ranged attacks after we hit it with an N2 bomb.
Fuyutsuki frowned. The angel. Is it now tracing our microwave communications? May we still aim the homing laser if that happens?
If we use a far enough camera, maybe.
Ritsuko shrugged.
It's awareness, not actual targeting with the AT field that matters.
I will not ask. I will not ask. I will not ask.
Shouldn't we ask the pilots that?
We will kill it! It will die! Asuka shouted. You hear me? Dead!
We'll manage somehow, Masato-san, added Shinji. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, possibly the Romanian countryside, Kaworu sat on the grass with a large map spread out in front of him. He clutched at his head and spat aside, blood staining the grass and an edge of the map. I see. That's where you're going. This is disappointing. Life without surprises must be bleak indeed. What a cursed gift this precognition is. No wonder we never needed it. He fell back and lay down with his arms stretched out. Consider this mercy, Lilim. At least you will have been spared the terror of what's to come. At least your souls are freed, while still pure and uncorrupted. Ah, unfortunate Lilim. The Great Mother is so cruel. There's nothing I can do here that is actually as painful to you as what she wants. 2 hours, 9 minutes after Sahaquiel passed Berlin 2, and then 5 hours before it reaches NERV, Nevada. Boom! As if sensing this release, though still all the way across the globe, Sahaquiel began a rapid adaptation so characteristic of its species. The Angel! It's breaking up! Makoto shouted. It's separated into 2 pieces, each at a different vector. Not this time, Shinji whispered. Not again. This far and no further! Principio Aeternis took its hands out of the glowing ring and raised its arms to the sky like a concerto conductor. Another laser thread shot out, passing between its arms to the east over the Pacific. Seen from orbit, 2 bright lines stretched out like God doodling upon the face of the Earth. Sahaquiel was somewhere over the Atlantic, its 2 halves spinning. The Angel has released bombardment pods, he added, nearly panicking. How many? Masato asked. A lot. 12, 18 discrete signals, and they're each going off at extremely high speed. She turned aside, towards Ritsuko.
So, nukes? Doesn't matter at that speed. Here, this grouping, it's aimed at us. That's most likely to be nukes trying to break through our AT field defense. If we just go by size, its AT field should be much stronger than our comparatively puny Evangelions. Angels had the unlimited power of the S2 engine anyway, while they were forced to rely on banks of capacitors. Sahaquiel had shrunk visibly. Its main body was hardening into a black sphere of 6 long feelers. It reminded them of the Sputnik, actually, or Precambrian jellyfish. By sacrificing its ability to grow pods, it attained greater defense and mobility. Where are those pods aimed? The Prime Minister shouted out, his voice breaking. Everywhere, the Minister of Defense said beside him, visibly cowering. There's no nation on this earth that will be left untouched. Even if Japan managed to survive, only Day would remain intact. Much of the industries and businesses reliant upon the overseas market would collapse. And the world would blame them for failing them. It's like Impact all over again. It is Impact all over again, only a lot of smaller ones instead of one big event. He couldn't live through that again. Not again! He clutched at his heart and gasped for breath. Kaji took out a cigarette and lit it. Come on, Shinji. Please. You can do something about this. He ground out, stabbing the lit end of the stick into the metal desk before even putting it to his lips. He could only watch and wait as a bright line crawled towards the main screen map. The homing laser, heading east, past the line of red triangles aimed at Tokyo 3. You're not going to intercept? Huh, Masato smirked. Yes. Killing the Angel's more important right now. Kensuke, Toji, and Hikari were sitting inside one of the deep shelters. Though cooped up in there for several hours now, they showed no impatience at the lack of news or being locked in. They felt the ground rumble. It's going to be all right, Nozomi said up to Kodama and to the people around her. He's up there. He's going to make it right. Power! More power! Asuka yelled. He needs more if this is going to work! You're at your limit, pilot, saw you?
Ray replied, squinting slightly as the containment ring pulsed rapidly. No more second chances! No more lives being spent to buy us time! We need to end this now! Please! Give me more power!
Ray, we're releasing N2 mines,
Masato said softly over the link.
I'm leaving how many to use up to your judgment.
Thank you, Major Katsuragi. One of the Ava elevators delivered a heaping pile of N2 mines.
Pilot Tsuyu, I am charging your laser.
2 homing lasers struck, the collision of 2 AT fields lighting up the sky. Shinji still had his eyes closed. He shouted through his soul, You better have a skull, you bastard, for I'll have it for my throne! The beams broke through. Elsewhere, Kaworu was shoved back hard and into a tree, for no readily apparent reason. He coughed up more blood and grinned. The tree behind him fell over, its roots naked to the air. He managed to keep to his feet. He began to chuckle. I see. Adam within me, thy will be done. He lifted his hand up as if reaching for the sky. We begin again. Thank you, Shinji-kun. Principio Eternus roared and opened its hands. The beams split, one to each finger. The homing laser streaked to follow the pods released earlier. A few of the closer ones were annihilated, but there were those already almost at the cities, and there were more than 10. No! Shinji screamed. Control. I need more control! More! Hey, Evangelion. We must have more! The roar was such that the air itself shook from a pressure wave. The Evangelion writhed in place, and its back armour around the entry plug exploded. Light issued forth.
Is that?
Masato gasped in horror.
No, it can't be.
Like she remembered.
Wings.
As the ribbon of light unfolded, to her relief, but continued disbelief, it wasn't like the terrible visage of Adam.
Arms,
Maya whispered.
He gave himself 2 more arms.
The glowing limbs coalesced and spread its own fingers. In the distance, the beams split again. The capacitors are exploding, Shigeru shouted. They can't handle the strain. Oh shit! Everyone evacuate that area! Booms echoed through the corridors. Misato shouted up to the screen.
Ray! Stop feeding the laser!
My will is strong, she said softly. I will not bend.
My hate is pure, Asuka added. I will not break!
Those gathered under the statue of Christ the Redeemer in Rio watched the glowing streak of their doom approach from the east. From further west, another bright light was coming, but it was a second too late. The pod burst above them, darkening the sky with pellets, and they closed their eyes to accept their fates. Then moments later, one child opened hers. She cooed as she saw a jagged black fragment the size of a human fist hovering in the air inches from her face. It was held back by a thread of glowing gold, bright but not enough to hurt the eyes. One by one, the people realized they were still alive, and why. They looked up, and it was like the hand of God itself stretched down from the heavens, a still shower of golden thread, and the pieces that would have killed them crumbled into power. The threads remained, touching them. These were warm, leaving a ticklish feeling. All over the world, this scene was repeated. London 2, Washington 2, Paris 2, NERV Nevada, Memphis, New Delhi, Lhasa, Moscow 2, temporary refugee stopping points of Great Panic giving way to stunned awe, and many more besides. The detonations of nukes were held back by golden threads acting like cages, slowly being dispersed. Back in Tokyo 3, Principio Eternus had grown 2 more glowing arms, for a total of 6 usable hands. Some fingers were splayed open, some were palms out, and one was in an OK sign to compress the homing laser's AT field. The world heard a strange, otherworldly tone as the homing laser began to vibrate the air. As long as I remain, you shall not need to fear. It wasn't so much heard as simply understood. The tongue was unnecessary. 4 pods were arriving quickly. The Evangelion seemed to be trapped motionless, fighting to maintain the net that blanketed the earth. Mana Kirishima grinned fiercely.
Aim!
Air defense! Fire! Magnus Tancred picked out a pod and shot dual positron beams at it. The pod exploded. Again! The next pod likewise was unable to maintain a strong enough AT field. The great benefit of using the Trident as a mobile turret was that it carried its own power supply and tracking mechanisms. The remaining burst into pellets and larger spheres that presumably contained the absorbed nukes. God damn! She shouted out. Gunner! Weapons free! Destroy the larger ones first! The fire-linked plas cannons raked at the dark cloud. The dreadnought's chin-mounted 20mm AA cannon fired in bursts. It wouldn't be enough. Principio Eternus lowered one hand and clenched it, and the sky above Tokyo 3 blossomed with fire. The sky was an ocean, flowing red like tides of burning blood. It roared mightily, amplified and carried by its golden threads to the farthest ends of the earth. From wolves in Alaska to elephants in Africa, every animal howled, /roared, /made noise in response. The homing laser faded. Unit 0 and 2 slumped back, their internal batteries completely drained. Even Unit 1 with its Titan modules had barely a few seconds left in its cells. Principio Eternus moved its 6 arms around, in strange and graceful gestures. The pitch of disturbed air sounded like a choir tone. It then raised its right hand up, palm open. Something slammed into it from the southeast. The 4 glowing arms faded as well. The Ava stared at the object it held. It was an angel's avian skull mask. There was not a sound so horribly wrong as that of an Evangelion attempting to laugh. Are you sure it's wise to keep trying to piss off a god, Ikari? Kozo Futsky whispered, his eyes wide with shock. That frown on Gendo's face was the merest tip of displeasure beyond epic measure. Still no response, Senpai! Maya was screaming, her voice sobbing. Activate the plug suit's cardiac boosters again. Stimulants, loud noises, everything! Ritsuko shouted over the steady beep. Again. 1, 2. Again! Shinji-kun! Hang in there, Shinji! Misato was screaming too, directly into the entry plug comlinks.
Психологическое исследовательское объединение «Русалка».
Oh yeah? Say that again?
Психологическое исследовательское объединение «Русалка».
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, I can say that. Yeah, alright. Siho Kinticheskauya. Isle va tel. Siho Kintich. Fuck that!